Hey there, Michael Church, Crawl Space Ninja and Basement Ninja, and today I want to talk about how to protect your basement from flooding or your crawl space from flooding, and I want to talk about the differences between a sump pump battery backup or a battery backup sump pump. Stay tuned. Bradley in Indiana, that is a wonderful question. And before I get into that, the first thing I want to let everybody know is why in the world would you think about using a battery backup system on your sump pump in the first place? Well, here in East Tennessee, typically we get a lot of thunderstorms, and when are you more likely to lose power is during a thunderstorm. Okay, so just so you know, there are two different kinds basically on the market of battery backup systems for sump pumps, okay? The first one I'm going to talk to you about is the battery backup sump pump. That is the one where you have two sump pumps. You have a primary and a secondary. And normally the secondary pump is a plastic, less horsepower, smaller capacity pump that when the power goes off, it kicks in. So it's not being used ever except during a power outage. Now, the number one thing to remember is that most basements, most sump pumps, most crawl spaces fail during power outages, right? So whether you choose the battery backup sump pump or the sump pump battery backup, you need to choose one. I really think that every basement and every crawl space should have a battery backup system on their sump pump in the basins, all right? Because if you take a thunderstorm at your house, when are you most likely going to lose power, and when is your basement and crawl space most likely going to flood? During a thunderstorm. So if you don't have that added protection of a battery backup system, whether it's the sump pump battery backup or the battery backup sump pump, you need to have some protection. So as I mentioned before, the battery backup sump pump is a 2-pump system. The sump pump battery backup is a 1-pump system. Now what it is it's our system that we sell online. It's the Pump Sentry system. So what it does is it uses the same pump. Whether the power's on or off, it uses the same pump. Now, what are the advantages of that over the one I just mentioned? Well, first of all, it never loses the horsepower, and it's the same pump. Now, the other sump pump, the little battery backup sump pump, like I mentioned, is normally less horsepower, not used at all unless there's a power outage. Now, when do things typically fail? Most likely is when they're not being used. So if your primary pump switches over to also be your battery backup pump, you already know it's used. It works, you know it's always working. You don't know if that battery backup pump on the other system works or not until there's a power failure. Okay, so with our system, with the Pump Sentry, it's using the same pump, same horsepower, all that. So you're still moving the same amount of water. So our Flowtech pumps are half horsepower. So if we installed a battery backup sump pump, the main pump would be a half horsepower, and then that secondary pump normally is a 1/3 to a 1/4 horsepower. So you're losing power, you're losing the ability to move more water during the time when you really need it the most. Just so you all know, keeping these two separate is confusing. Sump pump, battery backup, sump pump. So if I mess up, please forgive me, and I'll try to fix it. But the other thing about the battery backup sump pump, the one with the 2 pumps, is that when those 2 go out, you don't replace just one, okay? Most people are like, well, you know, I got 2 pumps. If one of them goes out, I'll just replace it. Normally those guys come in a kit. They come with the primary and the secondary pump together. So if for some reason that pump, that primary or the secondary pump goes out, you typically got to replace both of them. And I know there's some DIYers that could probably replace one, I get it, but most of the time, then you got this other pump that may be not as good, so you put in a great pump with an old pump, and eventually you're going to have to replace that old pump too, so you might as well just replace both of them. The advantage of the sump pump battery backup is that it's one pump. So if for some reason it goes out, that's the only pump you got to deal with. If the Flowtech goes out, you know, these guys normally last 10+ years, you know, but water is corrosive. You know, the things in water is corrosive. So eventually you know, it costs you more to replace 2 pumps versus 1 pump. Okay, another advantage of the pump Sentry system over, say, a dual pump battery backup system is that you can actually put 2 to 3 marine batteries in succession to make that half horsepower Flowtech sump pump last longer. Now keep in mind, the duration of how long a battery backup system will last depends on how often it kicks on, right? So if you're taking on a ton of water and this thing is just running constantly, it's not gonna last as long as if it's just intermittently running maybe every 15 minutes versus every 3 minutes. So it's kind of hard to say that one battery will last 8 hours. I mean, it could last 3 hours, it could last 8 hours, but if you've got the ability to add 2 to 3 more batteries to that primary battery to help the pump Sentry keep that sump pump working longer, especially those of us that live in a part of the country where maybe we get a lot of electrical failures, whether it's from storms or grid failures or whatever, then having multiple batteries in succession is certainly going to be an advantage over one battery. And you know, my favorite thing about the pump Sentry system is the fact that you can use it on any sump pump. If you have a single sump pump system now and you think, oh wow, Michael Church just talked me into getting a battery backup, well, you've got to take out that primary pump and then install that dual pump battery backup system, okay? So the nice thing about the pump Sentry is that you can hook that pump Sentry up to your current sump pump. Now that is wonderful. It's less problems, less process. You don't have to have a new discharge line ran or anything like that. You can just take the pump Sentry and hook it directly up to your sump pump. So those are some of the advantage of the pump Sentry and some of the difference between a sump pump battery backup and a battery backup sump pump. So my name is Michael Church with Crawl Space Ninja, and I hope, and Basement Ninja, and I hope you make it a happy and blessed day, and we'll see you later.